Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to our discussion on structuralism. Let us sum up as to what we have been doing in the past many days. So far, we have looked at the language of a narrative, right? With little attention to the author or the reader. Narrative theory pays a good deal of attention to the nature of the text, while reader response theory focuses on the reader as the generator of the meaning. Our model for reading a narrative is as follows. However, it is not really so simple. Where does the narrator fit into this scheme of things? Did the author have a specific reader in mind when he or she wrote his poem or novel? A more accurate model of narrative process would be as follows. Let us examine this model. The real or the historical author says Walter Scott wrote Ivanhoe and other novels. We all know this, right? But Scott may have constructed a particular persona while writing the novel. That is, the novelist, the flesh and blood Scott, is not the same as the model of the writer constructed in and by the book. For example, numerous authors have a short prefatory note that provides some biographical details, including some information about how many this novel has come into existence, how they came to write this book. To go back to your favorite example, Mary Shelley wrote a short account or a preface when she has written her book called Frankenstein, which all of us can read. We assume that Scott or Mary Shelley actually are the real authors. We merge the historical figure with the person who has composed the book. Yes or no? And so we construct the image of the author from the components of the book. Janet defines the implied author as the image of the author in the text. This is the implied author, a term first used by Wayne C. Booth in his classic work, The Rhetoric of Fiction, in 1961. Then, the person who is telling the story can also be a persona. Yes or no? A character adopted by the author may be. Okay. The author may narrate the story through a narrator, a third person point of view. A fictitious figure that may have nothing to do with the real author. This is, of course, the narrator. Who does the narrator narrate the story to? In fact, the text constructs an addressee, to whom the story is told. This is the narratee. The narratee is a figure that is a direct recipient of the story, but also constructed by the narrative is an imaginary reader with particular qualities. So, the reader is a model and not necessarily a true person. The dear reader in the 18th and 19th century novels is not always you. Maybe a BA student in Hyderabad or Delhi or London when he or she is reading the novel for the first time. The reader is a construction and is implied in the work. Yes or no? This is the implied reader. So you have a real reader, you have a narratee, you have the narrator, and you also have the dear reader, and you also have the implied reader. Finally, the implied reader may not be the same as the real flesh and blood reader browsing through the novel. The historical or the real reader is the person who reads the text. Thus, we do not see narrative communication as moving from the real author through the narrative or the text to the real reader. Instead, we see the real author constructing a persona, an implied author in the text, delivering the narrative via a narrator to the addressee or the narratee of the story, to an imagined reader of the book, who may or may not correspond to the real reader. Very strange, yes or no? Structuralism is an extremely useful and a well organized approach to literary and cultural texts in this context. It does not actually interpret the sequence of the events to try to find what they mean, but as Jonathan Kuller very rightly summarized structuralism tries to determine the nature of the system underlying the event itself. And so, the scope of structuralism can be very well understood if we look at Roland Barthes. Roland Barthes applied structuralist method to the general field of modern culture. In his book Mythologies that he published in 1957, modern France is understood through the literature that is read associated with boxing and wrestling, cinema image of the face, magazine photo of Algerian soldier saluting the flag, eating steaks and chips, the styling of the cars, the perfumes, the fashions. All these are to be identified from the text in order to understand what France was. Yes or no? And all these can be understood from the texts, one text, many texts, maybe literature, maybe non-literary also. Getting the meaning or reconstructing the culture in this way is what is called as the structuralistic reading. When we talk about the American structuralism, in 1970s in America, these structuralistic notions have gone to America also, influencing Bloomfield, Sapir, Worf, and others. The American writer Jonathan Cullers, The Structuralist Politics, the published in 1975, and the French Terence Hawkes's Structuralism and Semiotics, published in 1977, David Lodge, a professor of English at Birmingham, publishing his Structuralism in 1980, have all come out with the notions of Roland Barthes or Janet or Julia Kristeva or maybe Mikhail Bakhtin and so on and so forth that we discussed under the heading of narratology. What exactly do the structuralists do while reading a text? In fact, they analyze the narratives. 2. The conventions of a particular literary genre. A network of intertextual connections has been observed. A projected model of underlying universal narrative structure. A notion of narrative as a complex of recurrent patterns or motifs. And they interpret literature in terms of a range of parallels with the structures of language as described by the modern linguists. So it's not just the meaning that they give, they also comment upon the literary genre, intertextual connections, universal narrative structures, the motives that are hidden behind to understand the culture and society by establishing the intertextual connections with not only literary texts but also the non-literary texts. So structuralism is a wider way of understanding the text, not as literary genre, but to understand the culture itself, the society itself, the people itself. Getting it? The key concepts that we discussed in structuralism for the last few classes is that language structures are perceptions of the world, number 1. Number 2, language is understandable as a system of signs, SIGNS. Number 3, signs are understandable synchronically and diachronically. Synchronically, right, is at a particular time and diachronically is over the historical period. Literature as manifestations of sign systems with signifier and signifieds. No sign can be fully understood because every time you try to understand the sign, signifier is equal to signified, you get some other signified. So the meaning gets postponed and no sign can be understood. It is our attempt to understand, re-understand and trying to understand and thereby giving you intertextuality, metatextuality, hypotextuality and many a times hypertextuality also. Getting it? For example, Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn or maybe the Mahabharata. That's the best example. Shakespearean dramas, for example. When you read the same story, when you read the same poem, at an early age, the meaning will be different. At a later age, the same text has been read with a different interpretation because of the understandings. And at a much later age, much older age, the same text will give you much matured understanding. Do you think that these meanings were not there when you read the first time? It's very difficult to tell us all the meanings are involved in the same text, but it interprets in a different way for different people across time and space. Agree with that? And this can be possible only by closely reading the text. And structuralism draws our attention from biographical criticism, from social criticism, for moral criticism, from biographical criticism to the textual analysis and getting the meaning of it. In conclusion, therefore, we can say that structuralism rejects the traditional interpretations and stresses the conditions of meanings. It rejects the statements of the work and stresses its grammar, language. It adopts a source lang in which a particular work, parole, has got its meaning. Cultivation of structures of rules enables and governs the production of interpretation of the literary work in its true sense, is what it believes. We could have a little demerits also. How can we say that a text doesn't have any connection with its writer? Structuralism believes that the true meaning is within the text, within the words, within the grammar, within the expressions and syntax. And it has got nothing to do with society or maybe the writer. Structuralism destroys, in fact, all existing models of understanding but supplies actually kuch nahi, none. They try to bring out structures through binary oppositions but cannot appreciate to understand what makes literature great. Much of what is said in structuralism is already there since Anglo-Saxon times, if you look into it. It's right from Plato, Aristotle times. Structuralism has succeeded in unmasking many signs, but it has not shown any methods as to how these signs work to get the meaning. But still, structuralism offers a theory of literature and a model to interpret literature based upon the observation of language and the code that is used in the expression. It's in this way that structuralism becomes the beginning of the 20th century theory. That is the first theory with which we start. Thank you very much for being a part of it. We shall meet in the next class for our further deliberations. Bye from now.